I have a lot of family coming in.
We were,
All right,
With the
it's
summer,
5:33
spring,
p.m.
Get yourself busy and distracted.
Good evening,
working
Budget
hard on
Committee
doing this thing.
members and city employees. My name is Lynn Carson, and I am the Budget Committee Chair. Shauna Calhoun is going to be recording our minutes tonight, so thank you, Shauna. I am calling this meeting to order. Let's start with the roll call. Joe Buck,
here.
Ali Afghan,
Here.
Massine Mboop,
Here.
Trudy Corrigan,
Here?
Aaron Rapp,
Excused.
okay. Rachel Verdict,
Here.
John Wenlin,
Here.
Elizabeth Zeller,
Here.
Steve Dodds,
Here.
Shannon Gritty,
Here.
Al Calabria,
Here.
Shaima Shalihi,
Here.
Gary Lobello,
Here.
Lynn Carson, I'm here. Okay, we have been given the minutes of our last meeting. Do we have a motion to approve the Budget Committee meeting minutes for October 20th, 2022?
So moved.
Second. All right, minutes approved. Next, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed.
Any opposed? All right, approved. As you can see, this is my first time as chair. Thank you. Next, I'm going to give the floor to Martha and basically to review our ground rules and discuss our schedules and agenda. Right,
Do we
and-
have them with us, the ground rules from last time? Did we bring them? We're going to come back to that item a little bit later in the meeting. I do think that they're important because they sort of talk about what kinds of, what level we're going to go to in the budget process and how we're going to approach reviewing the budget when we get to that. But I didn't realize they weren't in front of you.
Okay, and Martha, when are you going to cover the goals of the BC? Was that during?
I'll do that
ground
during, I've got a presentation on the budgeting, for the sort of how the budget is put together and then the council goals and how they fit together on items 6 and 7.
rules? Okay,
So maybe you want to go to public comment and we'll come back to the ground rules as soon as
sure.
Anthony and Sean dash back in.
Sure, no problem. Before we do that, I saw your PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah.
It is so well thought out.
Oh, good.
Written out, thank you. And I think it's a lot to do with the past chair, Al Calabria, in terms of asking for all these and, putting these procedures in place. Thank you so much for, getting all these in front of us. I have to say, we didn't have this the last time we did the budget, and this is really helpful. Thank you. Okay, so I would like to open the floor for public comment.
Do we have?
Jeff, would you like to speak at all?
Jeff and Judy Harris. No, it's Judy Harris, I think. Jeff and Judy Harris, I think that's who they are.
Hi, yeah, this is Jeff and Judy.
Hello.
Did you want to offer comment to the budget committee tonight?
Well, I was just wondering if, we're just listening because I don't really know how all of this works, but we're listening very carefully to see how the capital improvement project that affects us directly, of course, might be considered. So I don't know if there has been, this is regarding the Fifth Street flooding. Is there a list of capital improvement projects that you will be considering this evening, or is that for later meetings?
It's for a later meeting. So this is a sort of a pre-meeting where we talk about how the budget process is going to work. We're going to have 2 meetings for sure in May. The first one will present the overall budget on the 4th of May, and then a week later on May 11th, we'll present the capital improvement plan, which is where that project will be discussed.
What project?
Very good, thank you. Well, we're going to listen in and try to learn something here. So thank you.
Right.
Great. So let us go on next to budgeting for priorities.
Yeah, let's do that. How about if we do the sort of the overall presentation, then we'll come back to ground rules before you talk about the 6-year forecast. Does that sound okay with everybody? So would you fire that PowerPoint presentation for me, Shauna? All right. So just what I said earlier is I want to ground us in that as when this is our kickoff meeting, but it's really a pre-meeting. So what we're going to do here is set the context for the budget. We won't actually be talking about the proposed budget until we deliver the budget message to you at your very first meeting, which will be on May 4th. You will get the document about a week beforehand and have a chance to review it. And actually, I think many of you know, under Oregon law, you guys can't talk about the proposed budget until it's actually in front of you and until I, as your budget officer, deliver the budget message to you. So tonight is really about what are the issues and what's the context and setting of where we headed with the upcoming budget process. I thought since many of you are relatively new, about half of you, slightly less than half, are new to our budget process, or you weren't here 2 years ago when we did the budget process that we're currently in, that I would start with an overview of how do we budget in Lake Oswego, because it's actually different than how other local governments budget. And it's grounded in, I always tell people it's grounded in both sort of human psychology, but also an outcome-based performance approach to budgeting. And it helps during the dialogue later when you're considering various issues that you'll want to talk about and that we as your staff will want to make sure you talk about. It helps put those issues in context. So go ahead and fire the next slide, Shauna. Many of you know, too, I have denied my need for reading glasses, and so if you see me put my glasses on to take them off, it's just part of my delusion about my age, or at least the age of my eyes. So I'm going to give you an intro to how we budget here, and the two things that are super important for me to get across, and I don't want you to walk away from not understanding, is why do we do a biennial budget? Most local governments in Oregon do an annual budget process. We do a biennial budget process, and there's some really good reasons why. There are other cities. There's probably another 25 cities in Oregon that also do biennial budgets. We're not alone. We are not odd, but there are important principles underneath it. And the second is I want to make sure I cover how do we approach budgeting for the general fund departments. It's different than what other cities do. It's better. So the first thing I want to make sure I cover is, in my view, and I think the finance director agrees with me, and I'm pretty darn sure the council agrees with me, is although the budget is an expression of policy, it certainly is, its fundamental job is to be the spending plan for their strategic action plan. So I don't think of the budget as a policy document that sits out there in space all by itself. It's actually a policy document that implements other policies. And those of you who have suffered through goal setting with me know I think about all this work as a sense of alignment. You'll notice it starts with the big picture view of the community and its culture. Then it moves on to what strategies we deploy to move towards that vision. Then what are the projects that we take up? What's the work we take up to do that? And then how do we implement those projects? You'll see in the very bottom is where the budget shows up for me. When I first wrote this slide, it was kind of obnoxious. Was to say to you that the budget is the tail, not the dog. I didn't mean to be obnoxious in that way because your work is super important. Your work, in my view, is helping us make sure that that spending plan really is aligning us towards that strategic vision of the community. So this work is really important, but it needs to nest within a sense of where we're headed. Okay, Shauna. So I told you it's different, and I told you most cities do annual budgets. Most cities handle the general fund in a very different way, and here's why we've moved away, essentially. Annual budgets where you treat the general fund as a zero-sum game takes a lot of staff resources. It takes us months to put the budget together. It takes months for departments before we even, I used to joke in my old job that we would finish the audit on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. We'd let the finance department have Thanksgiving dinner, and we needed them back at their desks on that Friday morning so they could start the budget process. The other thing that happens in most general approaches to the general fund is it fosters competition inside the organization as opposed to teamwork. And I can do all the work I want about teamwork, but if I get to the budget process and I basically have told everybody they're competing against fire and police for the spare surplus dollars, then we end up with behavior inside the organization that isn't focused on the fact that we all serve the residents, people, employees, and visitors of the community. Traditional budgets create a use it or lose it mentality. I can't tell you how many places I used to work where I'd have to go to my department heads on the 1st of June and say, I know you think you're going to lose the money, but please, please don't go on a spending spree in the month of June. And they would inevitably go on a spending spree in the month of June, which often they spent the money on stuff that they really needed, but it wasn't a long-term view. It was like, what do I have to do in the next three weeks? We often focus on the wrong things. That thing I just mentioned, I can't tell you how many times that I would find brand new computers in offices every year because folks didn't want to lose their spending authority. It takes the power away from department directors and it shifts the burden to me. And then the problem is we spend all this energy and have all this bad will, and usually budgets don't change very much year to year. So we spend all these resources on something that doesn't make a lot of difference. Okay, so what do we do here? So my predecessor, go ahead and click on the next one, had this idea that I think is right. It comes from the work of a thinker called Daniel Pink. And he had an idea that if you have folks who are skilled, if you have folks who have a sense of purpose, and if you allow them to figure out what the most important work is to do, that they will perform for you. And we've designed a budget process that's sort of premised on this concept. Go ahead, Shauna. So we have a motivation-based process. So first, it's biennial in that we don't allocate a huge amount of resources every single year. We figured out what's the time horizon where we really need to think about putting our hands on the wheel to steer the financial ship of the city, and how do we allocate resources appropriately, and that's really a biennial approach. We have an enterprise approach to the general fund. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. And then last but not least, we have a policy-driven capital improvement plan. That is, the city council sets policies. You'll see that when you see the budgets that I produce. You will see a direct tie between the council goals and the capital improvement plan. It will connect for you. Go ahead. You heard me say this before, but I think that in other cities, the frustration often in the budget process is that we feel like sometimes we're on a hamster wheel. We're spending a lot of energy and not getting a lot of change. I put this in because I originally did this presentation for a larger group, and I wanted to make them laugh at this point. You can laugh or not. It's up to you. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so why do we do biennial? Here's the truth. The city services fundamentally do not change very much year over year. Every year, we sweep the streets. Every year, we clean the water so we can drink it. Every year, we mow the parks. And in our form of government with our revenue sources, our revenues are also really predictable. So when ballot measure 50 passed back in the 1990s, I think a lot of us were really concerned about its long-term effect on local governments and what it meant. But what it's actually turned out to do is give us an incredible level of stability. In a great year when the economy is going gangbusters, we might see a 0.5% increase in our property tax revenues. And in a really bad year, when things are bad, maybe we'll see a 0.5% decrease. But we are really insulated at the city of Lake Oswego from the economy. So we got predictable services and predictable revenues. So looking at the city's activities over a long haul allows us to plan. It allows us to plan for services, and it allows us to do financial planning in the off year. So a lot of what we do in the off year, at least inside the organization, is think about whether we're on the right track. Now, there are exceptions to what I just said. We do have some revenues, like our transient occupancy tax, that are subject, that are influenced heavily by the economy, but they're really a small percentage of the city's budget. Okay, go ahead. All right, the second half of this is the enterprise approach to the general fund. So in a traditional budget process in a traditional organization, we would put all the general fund revenue, all of it, into the revenue side of the equation. And then we would have all the departments inside the general fund allocated inside that one fund. What we do here is a little different than that. First of all, we let departments essentially keep the revenues that they generate in the general fund. So Parks and Recreation, for example, all of their recreation revenue shows up in their revenue line. It doesn't show up in the sort of general revenue side. We've had a long conversation about where business license fees belong, and we moved them this year. We can talk about, that's one of the things we will talk about in the budget message. But the planning department generates fee revenue from land use applications. So that shows up in their revenues, not general revenues. And then at the very beginning of the process, based on what the council told me during goal setting, I make an allocation of the general revenues, which are largely property taxes and franchise revenues, to the various departments. I start with the assumption that we got it right the last budget biennium. So in other words, I make it pretty much across the board, and then I adjust based on what I have seen the departments do or based on the council's goals. Every once in a while, a council goal results in a sort of a massive need to change spending, and if those happens, I don't just make those changes. You'll remember 2 years ago, in implementing one of the council's goals around public safety, the police department proposed a really increase in staffing. Rather than make that decision myself, I brought that to all of you to make sure that that was something that you wanted us to do in the long haul. Okay, so in general, this process works really well because then the department director balances the budget to the revenues that they've been allocated. Department directors know. I mean, we can predict personnel costs really accurately, right? Department directors usually know how they did in the past biennium around materials and services. If they don't, we have discussions about why don't they know. But they know what all the inputs are. They know what the performance goals and expectations are. They know what the council expects them to perform, so they can balance their budgets. I don't have to do that, and it's unfortunate because it means I don't get to play Santa Claus at the end, but I also don't have to be the Wicked Witch of the West in those years where we have revenue shortfalls. Does that make sense? They also don't compete against each other during that process. They're not thinking about how can I make a pitch to the budget officer that's more persuasive than my other department heads. It's really awesome. They get to carry over any money they don't spend during the biennium with some exceptions, and I'll tell you what they are, which is we see them growing their ending fund balance a lot. We generally will reduce the allocation. So they still get to keep the carryover, but they might not get as much revenue the next time around. Actually, both Sean's department and my department, we often will lower our own allocation because we don't always spend everything. But that allowing them to carry over takes away that use it or lose it mentality. And because they can carry it over, they can think about using that unspent money for one-time things that might actually be a longer-term investment in the productivity of their departments. Sometimes they need to save for something. The fire department routinely needs to save for fire engines, for example. We have them for a long time, but they're super expensive. And so the departments get control over the planning for those one-time expenditures. And then unique to Lake Oswego, this really is unique. We have departments carry contingencies inside their budgets as opposed to just having one giant bucket of general fund contingency. We still have general fund contingency, but we don't have just one citywide bucket. They each have some places they can draw on if they do have unexpected events. This was really important at the beginning of COVID before we knew that we were going to get a federal assistance during the COVID process. Okay. Before I go on, yeah, let me do this slide first. So, you know, it's funny because I think of this, this was called the bucket slide, but I actually think of it more like a syringe, but this could be just because we've spent a lot of the last few years. You can kind of see how it goes. We start with all the property tax revenues, and then we allocate it out. By far, the biggest share goes to public safety, and then it gets allocated to the other city departments, sort of in that sort of order in terms of how much do they get. Some of what you're seeing in terms of those other things, the tubes, is their own revenues, right? There's some departments like parks, library that have a lot of revenues of their streets. They have a lot of revenues of their own. So, but this happens at the beginning. Okay, so I think I talked a lot about this earlier. Why does this work? First, we make the policy decisions up front. We're quite clear about how we're allocating the most discretionary revenues, which is our property tax revenue and our franchise fees. We don't have the competition. They have an incentive to not just go spend. I don't get to be Santa Claus or the Wicked Witch. And they don't have an incentive to hide money, right? Which is also something, I mean, it means you guys have less work to do, right? You don't have to go searching for the places because I can tell if they have put too much money in professional service. That's a commonplace departments hide money. If they put too much money in professional services, they don't spend it. Their ending fund balance grows, and I can see it, right? And you can see it. So that incentive to try to find places to disguise dollars is gone. Okay. The last thing I always like to talk about is we have a policy-driven CIP. Remember, the capital improvement program are the big projects that cost a lot of money and have a long life. We have master plans for almost all of our major capital programs, which we verify with field data, and then we have council policy goals that govern the expenditures. So one example is in the last biennium, the city council set a high priority on pedestrian safety projects, climate resilience, and geographic fairness in the community. And so when we did have a few extra dollars to allocate last year. You remember we put a $2 million infusion into the street fund last year to build pathway projects because that was a council priority. So as I say, you will see when we deliver the budget message, places where we've made explicit decisions around the capital improvement program to implement council priorities. Okay. Last thing I always like to talk about, because I think that in the past, we thought of the annual budget process as a way to sort of make sure that there was transparency in government spending, but we've implemented something, I know we did a training on this, where you can go on any person who has internet access can go on our website every day and see how much money we've spent. We update it every morning. And it's pretty intuitive. I will say, as a manager, I often want to find financial data that's sort of at the right level, because I don't want to scrutinize department expenditures by line item. I kind of want to know how they're doing, with the exception of overtime, but that's another story for another day. And the dashboard is a great tool for me. So if you're a citizen who wants to sort of know where is the city spending money, this is a great place to start. And I think gives us the ability to say, we actually are watching our spending in this 2-year budget process. We don't have to go through this elaborate process every year to make sure we're being good fiscal stewards. Okay. So, to sum up, council defines the policy, the purpose. The council and the budget officer grant autonomy to departments to make sure they're achieving purpose, and department directors have to know what they're doing to manage their budgets to make sure we succeed. So back to Scott's chart of autonomy, mastering purpose, it all shows up right here in the budget process. Okay, that's how we budget. Before I go to council goals, does anybody have any questions? It's a little different if you worked on budgets, and Gary's worked on budgets in other cities. It's a little different than other places.
Do we have a target for ending balance?
Yeah, we have policies, and Sean's going to remember exactly. And it depends on the fund. That's why I would never answer this question, right?
Yes. I mean, it's based on our operating budget. And so for like the general fund, our ending balance has got to be 16%, but we need a 14% contingency. For most of the utilities, again, it's on operating budget. It's a 10%. I think engineering is 5%, and public works support is 3%.
And some of it depends on what the risk factors are that depend on the fund. So, for example, in the general fund, because so much of our revenue is property taxes. Fiscal year starts on July 1. Property taxes aren't paid until November at the earliest, and so we had to get through July, August, September, October spending with carryover from the prior year. So our ending fund balance policy has to make sure we have enough cash to make that happen. Other funds are not, like the internal services funds, they're not particularly risky.
Martha, Steve has a comment.
Yeah, Steve.
Well, I'm just going to make a comment that having a bunch of new people here, this is a really good system. I came to the park department, lots of small projects, and it allowed them to think actually more than a year out. And I mean, it's a really good system, and people are, as you say, they're not spending money, crazily. So it's a really good system.
Yeah, it really encourages a long view as opposed to the short view.
Ali has a comment.
On page 9, you mentioned departments carry their own contingencies.
Yeah.
Does the city manager, Ms. Martha Bennett, have access to those contingencies, or once they are assigned to the departments, they stay in that department?
Well, we treat them as if that's revenue. I have access to the entire budget.
Okay. That's my question.
But there's that psychology piece that she works with.
It works if I don't go grab their contingencies. There are times when something might happen where the fact that those departments are carrying contingencies is a great safety net for the city.
Yeah, thank you so much. And the process you laid out here makes much sense to me. Thank you.
All right, any other questions about the process? Okay, I'm gonna cover the council goals, because I just told you, I gave you the pyramid. I'm not gonna give you the pyramid again unless you wanna see it again. That the whole process from my perspective is about alignment, and I think when you see the budget in a little while, you will, as I say, you will see how we have created a spending plan to implement the council's vision. The council's set 8 strategic goals. I think of those as 3 to 5 years, sort of how are we going to go about doing our work to achieve our vision. And then they identified 20. I'm not going to look at Councilor Wendland because he and I debated about whether 19, 20, or 21 was the right number. We're probably still debating it in our heads. Initiatives, which I think of as projects. Some of them are policy projects. Some of that's mostly an allocation of city council time, but it does show up in terms of staff time, and sometimes it shows up in terms of capital projects or professional services spending in department budgets. So I'll try to call out where I think you'll see some of these things. So the first strategic goal is to ensure a safe, secure, and prepared community. When I think about this goal, I think about police and fire and all of our work around emergency preparedness. I just told you it's the largest share of the general fund allocation. The projects underneath here is to continue to guide the action plan on the community dialogue. For those of you who've been following that, the priorities for the police department in the coming year really relate to community engagement. The department's trying to sort of get back to the place where they're showing up for the community, not just when they're going to a call, but in other places where, because one of the things we've heard from the community is they like to know our officers, they like to know our department before they have to make a call. And then in sort of increasing our ability to be transparent in our reporting. We've improved a lot of our communications around policing, but we're doing some investments so that we can collect data in a different way, so we can really reflect what kinds of activity the department's engaged in the community. The next goal has been on the council's list for a little while. It's to implement a sustainable business model for the fire department. And I think the council will be talking about this in mid-April. That won't necessarily show up in this current budget, but I do think the results of this work will affect future budgets for the fire department. And then the last project is a new goal around trying to help some externally based community groups help us get residents ready to be prepared in the event of a disaster. I think we have learned in the last 3 years that in the event of Cascadia, to be candid, we're going to need folks to be self-sufficient for a lot longer than we thought. And so we need to help residents be ready for I think we used to tell people 3 days. It's going to be longer than that. And so I think this is a goal where we've got to figure out how do we leverage the relationships with the neighborhood associations and other nonprofits in the community, other organizations like churches, to make sure our residents are actually thinking about what would it take for them to be able to survive for longer. All right, next slide. The next slide is to support business investment and job creation in Lake Oswego. This shows up in a lot of different places. This is one where I would say you're going to see either programmatic changes in the budget or specific projects. The first one is to ensure the North Anchor redevelopment project stays on track. This is really more about making sure that we're doing frequent reporting. It's probably about half of the work that we're doing in redevelopment right now is making sure North Anchor really happens. The next one is to review the status and probably update our plans for our existing urban renewal areas and revisiting the status of the previous planning in the Foothills District. And then last but not least, the council adopted an economic development strategy last year that includes some specific initiatives And you see those listed here. That will just show up as programmatic work in the planning department, but also as a grant that we're going to be making to the Chamber of Commerce. Okay. The next one is to foster a welcoming and inclusive community. This was probably the toughest one for me to talk about in terms of where it shows up in the budget. There is a DEI or an equity program manager in the city manager's office, but most of this work is actually going to be happening sort of in terms of how do departments go about doing their work in the community. Some of these things are specific, like how we're doing outreach, and also how we're procuring goods and services. But I would tell you that where you're going to see more of the sort of the goal level work is at a programmatic level in departments. The library is probably the most forward thinking, and you may see some of these priorities show up in the library's budget. But for the most part, it's going to be more about how do we go about getting our work done, as opposed to radical changes in what the work is. So it might not have as clear budget tie as some of the other goals. Okay, next one. Although the climate one's next, right? And so it also, anyway, go ahead. Combat climate change and strengthen the community's resilience to climate impact. Actually, this will show up in the CIP for sure. The first one is to integrate climate action and resilience strategies into city projects, such as the CIP, how we're doing housing planning, and then at city facilities and fleet decisions, how we buy things, what we buy. One of the things we were learning about climate change, and actually having the Harrises on here earlier as a great illustration, is the way we experience rainfall in Oregon, in Western Oregon, is changing. And will probably continue to change when we get the rain, how it comes. And so just decisions about stormwater facilities are gonna, how they have to be sized, where they're located, what the priorities are, that's all gonna have to change. And the other council goal was to update the urban and community forest plan using the findings of last year's State of the Urban Forest Report. This will be done primarily through staff resources in the planning department, although you will see some professional services expenditures showing up there. All right, next one. The next one is the catch-all about effective operations of the city, and you'll see the emphasis is on public trust. And you'll see sort of how we think about how we build public trust, obviously getting better and better at our work, good customer service, wise infrastructure investments, and then how we take care of the public's money. The projects here, for the most part, the first two are, well, the first one is a capital project. Anthony could hold forth the rest of the evening on. I'm not going to let him, but the next one is sort of the work we're doing right now to figure out what to do about the library. I think the library was probably too small for the level of activity it supports the day it was opened, but they do such an amazing job that we all are quite content. So trying to figure out what's the right solution for the library in the long haul is on our list. It might not show up as a capital project in the current budget, but maybe in a future budget. The next one is sort of not going to show up in the budget, which is really to make sure that we're getting our work done through our relationships with other local governments, regional governments, and state government. And then last but not least, which should be near and dear to this committee's heart, is to make sure we're doing a strategic review of our finances, including revenues, expenditures, and capital funding.
Can you say a little bit more on that one? Just.
Well, I think that you'll be doing quite a bit of this goal during the budget process. It would be a failure on our part if you're not. But I think the question then, I mean, I told you earlier that one of the benefits of a biennial budget is being able to take the long view. I think as we talk about certain issues as part of the budget process, if there are other things you want to do a deeper dive into, we'll try to flag those and come back. In the past, we've looked at things like headcount. We've looked at PERS. I think there was some, that's actually probably where the fire department goal originally came from, is just trying to think through what are the things that are either opportunities or threats to the city's long-term fiscal health. I told you earlier that the thing about being I think the other thing I will say about this is I think people have assumptions based on about the city's financial health based on what's happening with other local governments, and sometimes we want you to help us be advocates and allies about those myths, and because there are things that are true like PERS, but there are other things like what you see happening at the state in terms of revenue is not really going to affect us in the same way as it does other government agencies. Okay. All right, the next one is to invest in Lake Oswego's high-quality parks, natural areas, and recreational amenities. Obviously, parks are a huge part of our budget. We have, probably per capita, we have one of the largest parks budgets of any comparable jurisdiction, and we have a huge number of capital projects in this area. I don't think any of these will be a surprise to you. They will show up very clearly in the budget. And the second bullet in particular, Sean and I have been quite creative, and as we are in the throes of balancing the budget, we're trying to figure out how to make this one really go. But the first one is the Lake Oswego Recreation and Aquatic Center and golf courts, which are under construction, making sure that we deliver those on time and on budget. The next one is a funding strategy for RESEEK overall, but also a specific funding strategy around the skate park portion of that. So we're going to probably end up phasing that park construction. And then last but not least, starting the process to update the city's parks master plan. And the reason you should care about that is what I told you before, which is master plans are actually the #1 driver of how we build capital budgets. Okay. Last but not, no, I'm not done. This is 7. The 7th goal is to improve transportation connections, mobility, and safety for all travelers and all types of trips in Lake Oswego. The 2 projects underneath here are continuing our sidewalk and pathways focus. I think you all know the council increased the street maintenance fee last year to increase the amount of funding available for pedestrian infrastructure. And so we'll be talking with all of you about what the next priorities are. And then to adopt a transportation framework for Stafford McVeigh, which will then turn into capital projects in the future, probably. All right, last. Conserve the community's character, sense of place, and quality of life by planning. This is really the planning goal. The first bullet is housing initiative related. You'll see a whole bunch of stuff here. You will see this in the budget. It'll show up in terms of an allocation of staff time, professional services, and also some capital investments. And then the next thing is, and you'll see an asterisk, I'll explain it, which is to conduct a comprehensive review of our development codes to make sure our processes are as efficient and predictable for development as possible. The reason there's an asterisk here is there's a crosswalk to the job creation strategy because the economic development strategy, one of their implementation tasks is to update our development processes. So you'll see this project will actually implement council goals in 2 areas. Okay, that's the body of work. That's what I have to say. Questions, feedback, observations? Okay.
I have a question, Ms. Bennett.
Yes, ma'am.
It might be the climate change and strengthening the community's resilience part, or it could be the ensuring a safe and secure and prepared community. To your point earlier, with the rainfalls and all of the climate change that we're experiencing, same can be said about the ice and snow and,
Yeah.
and the level of them that we're getting. Is there at some point we're going to discuss, the level of equipment we have, how much of it do we have? Because I'm under the impression that parts of Lake Oswego don't necessarily get, service during those icy, stormy situations. So curious how we're addressing that, or if we do at some point.
Well, I mean, if a piece of equipment shows up in terms of capital investment, you guys will get a chance to talk about it. In terms of how we prioritize snow and ice removal, no, you won't get a chance to talk about it. I'm happy to visit with any of you about how we prioritize snow and ice removal anytime offline. But no, that's not really kind of how the budget committee will do its work.
Okay, thank you.
It's absolutely true that weather is becoming more variable.
Yeah.
So, right.
Have any
Right. We also didn't have heat domes when I was a kid. So. Anything else about council goals? It's an ambitious agenda. I will say that out loud to all of you. So it's a lot of work.
And I think we have to put the perspective that it's going to be not just this year, probably some of these projects are going to be a 2-year, maybe even 3-year project timeframe. So I think council has been really good since I've been on council about getting more strategic about our council goals instead of just having very quick little steps that you can take to try to get an accomplishment in 12 months. So a lot of our thinking and goal setting is really for the longer term. And that'll be reflected in the budget.
Yeah. Almost none of these particular goals are going to be done in 2023, almost none. We usually get 7 or 8 of them done, but maybe we'll get them done. Okay,
Great.
all right, do you want to go to ground rules?
Yeah, let's go to ground rules.
Anthony, you want to cover them?
Absolutely. So the first ground rule is that the meetings begin at 5:30, and we have the goal of ending by 8:30. About a decade ago, we had meetings that went beyond midnight, so that's where this rule comes from. I think there's at least 1 or 2 of you that might have been there. And then we have a public comment, an opportunity for that at every meeting. We'll have at least 1. If we need to, we can have 2, one at the beginning and the end, if there is the need for it. And then there's a 3-minute limit per person, and written public comments may also be received before meetings. And if there are a lot of people that want to speak about a topic, public comment duration will be up to 20 minutes at the beginning of the meeting, and then it's limited to 2 persons speaking on the same topic, 6 minutes per topic. If 3 or more people want to speak on the same topic, we would ask those subsequent to the first 2 testimonies not to comment on the same thing and request that they just say whether they agree or disagree with the first 2 comments. And this is if there's just a lot of people that show up on a particular topic. And we've had that in the past. It has happened. This is why this rule exists. The second rule is allow every member the opportunity to speak. The third one is that there's no deliberations outside of budget committee meetings. The fourth one is that passing a vote must be a majority of the entire committee, and that's 8. 5, we try to focus on the big picture and the major issues, and we keep suggested changes to a $10,000 minimum. Items less than $10,000 may be set aside and combined for consideration at the end of deliberations. And then 6 is ask questions in advance, and staff will respond with written answers within 1 week. Budget committee members are asked to provide questions to staff by 5 p.m. on the Monday before the next meeting. So, with the Thursday coming up after that, because we usually have them on Thursdays. And then 7, suggested additions or deletions will be recorded and set aside for discussion during deliberations if this is needed.
These are just the same, you've had it before, right? These are not new. So it's up to you
Have a
whether you,
comment.
yeah.
Yeah. Al, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Carson. So just to be clear on number 6, that makes a lot of sense, and my experience with staff is that if I have questions, I usually get a response, Sean and Anthony and many others, very rapidly. But are we to interpret this to say that unless they are asked in advance, they won't be allowed in the budget deliberation meetings?
No, I don't think that's the intent. It's just if you have those and we can answer them beforehand, please get them to us, and we would like to answer as many as we can, but if there's things that pop up, of course we address them.
Yeah, and I would say that in my experience, if you can get us a question, if you have the question, chances are more than one of you has the question, so if you can get us to them in advance, and we can respond to the entire committee in writing, that just helps the meetings go faster.
Of course it does, yeah.
But of course, you're all going to have questions.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a preference, really.
Well, it has to do more with if you want the whole group to have
The
a
answer
question
in
like-
advance.
or if you get them to us by 1, staff have time to actually go to the departments. And so if you just send it to Sean and myself and Anthony, we'll make sure everything gets out. We'll answer them all if you get them to us by Monday, every question you have to the whole committee. If not, then we can talk about them here, but we might not have the answers until the following meeting.
There's been times in the past, and this is where this rule comes from, people would get them the day of or the day before, but even mostly the day of, and it's hard to be able to talk to department heads and things like that if it's a complicated answer with only a few hours' notice. That's where that comes from. Yep.
Who should we send the questions to?
Yeah, so to me, Shauna or Sean, any of us would work. Yep.
Okay.
Or all 3 of us just to make sure if you wanted to. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, do you have a schedule up by chance? Is that on the agenda?
We were just going to talk through it.
Okay.
So the first meeting is slated to be May 4th, and then a second meeting, May 11th, and if needed, a third meeting, I'm not counting this one, but after the budget's out, a third meeting, if needed, would be May 18th, so 3 Thursdays in a row. In the past, we've been able to do it in 2 meetings, so. But we have a third one just in case.
If we work till midnight, we can get it done in 2. I'm just kidding.
And Sean, if I could add that we plan to distribute the budget on Thursday, April 27th at 5:30. Yep.
Is it?
Go ahead, do you have a comment? No. Right,
Right?
shall we go on to the next agenda item?
You ready, Sean?
Sure.
The lines don't cross.
Okay, so for everyone that's been on the committee before, this is the same 6-year forecast that we used. We've been using it for, I don't know, probably the last 6 years, and we kind of update it. And what it really is, it's focusing on the general fund. During the master fees and charges, we really go through the utilities and do a 5-year forecast with what's in the CIP, how the operations are, well, the rates that we're projecting on our models work. And then the utility rates get approved in December and they go into effect in July 1st. So we've already gone through what the utility rates are going to be and that kind of stuff. So this model here is really just talking about the operations of the general fund. I mean, it's focusing on just basically annual revenues and the annual expenditures. So what I've done here is, because I really kind of want to talk through some of what makes up the general fund, here's kind of our inputs. And so you can kind of see our first input here is from 2007. Our current property taxes have grown from, and these are in thousands, so about we'll call that $22 million with delinquent property taxes, to what we received last year, which was more about $39.5 million, which is about a 3.5% to 4% increase per year, which is about right, because we're getting a 3% annual increase on the maximum assessed value that we get. But then there's also been a lot of building and stuff, and we get about another 0.5% to 0.75% increase for new buildings, remodels, that kind of stuff, to our assessed value. The other thing you're going to see here is that our franchise fees are our next biggest one. But you can kind of see like PGE, we received almost $1.3 million last year. But our franchise fee here goes down to about here, is roughly between $3 and $4 million. But compared to $39 million, or even if you look at after the franchise fee is state shared revenues, down here, probably like $2.5 million. The lion's share of the money we receive is the property. That's why it's so stable and so easy, not easy, but I mean, it's stable and we can actually project out based on Measure 50 that Martha was talking about. But makes up, like I said, it makes up about 85% of the general fund revenues that aren't department specific, like the 911 fees that we charge Milwaukee and Westland for doing their 911 center, and the fire contracts we have with Dunthorpe and Lake Grove. But you had a question, Lynn?
Yeah, just a little bit of clarity on what the PGE franchise fee is. And can you also increase that column A so we could see everything properly? Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
So what the PGE franchise fee is, it's the right-of-way fee that we charge PGE for using the city's right-of-ways to run their power and stuff. We do it for Northwest Natural, well, actually any utility. Anthony is more about it than.
No, I think you covered it, and yes, you got it.
I actually had just more curiosity than anything. Are they individually negotiated? Like, are ours different than, for example, Oregon City or?
So yes, however, we've moved towards doing a right-of-way fee to standardize a lot of those things, so it's by category now. But there are a few that are still in the existing contract, and they're going to expire, and then they'll move on to this new system.
But yes, different jurisdictions have different charges.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry.
Thank you.
I apologize for over-answering.
Yeah, no, you actually
He knows
answered
too much.
Yeah, you also, that helped. Thank you.
Anyways, what I really want to highlight is how stable it is, but just how much of a proportion that property taxes really play in the overall, how the general fund operates. And then down here is kind of the expenditures that were budgeted for 2022. Okay.
Down there, what's the minus 523 on investment income?
Yeah. So that was a mark-to-market adjustment for we have a lot of our investments are invested in treasury bills, like 2-year treasury bills, 6-month treasury bill, 12-month treasury bills. So it's a recognized loss. So what happened is all of those investments had basis, say 0.3% was what we were earning. And then all of a sudden the market shot up to 3%. So we have these unrealized losses. I mean, we didn't lose any money. We're just not getting the interest. If we were to sell those investments, we would lose money, but we always hold to maturity. And so that was just an unrecognized or an unrealized loss. And it'll.
So you're not
turn itself.
anticipating that as an actual loss, you're just accounting for it in case.
Yeah,
you have
and
to
so
sell.
because of the accounting rules, we had to actually put it in the, so you can kind of see it here, we were getting,
Right.
800,000, and then things started to go not so good, and then we were getting 55,000. It's not that our fund balance is any different, and then here, this was just a mark-to-market adjustment in both the government pool and and that was just from a June 30th to June 30th, so a 1-year adjustment that we have to put in there. And then what are treasury bills, which is probably about 60% of our investments.
Is the government pool tied up in the treasuries? long-term?
Yes, they do, but they are able to
In more
invest in
short-term?
other things. It's done by the Oregon Department, the Treasury Department. And so that's kind of what most jurisdictions that have under $56 million in savings, they will only put it in the pool because it's like a savings account that gives a pretty good return and they can get to the money every day. We max it out, and so we have to then also have investments in our brokerage.
Right.
And then down here, I just wanted to kind of point out, generally, of the total expenditures for different departments, say like police and fire. So here, here's their total revenues is 13, but they're bringing in like $2 million in those other so they're getting this much money in property, franchise fee, and that kind of stuff. But I guess really what I'm pointing out is it's like $13 million, but their total personnel is 11.2 million. So we're just a very personnel-driven, I mean, we do personal services. I mean, personal services that other for-profit places don't do for people, like, policing, fire, that kind of stuff, parks. But that's what we are, so we're very personnel-driven. So my point is inflation is one of those things that really affects our expenditures. And in the past, it's been kind of low. I mean, it's kind of up and down, but previously up to the last 2 years, it was below 2%. So things have a way, we're very susceptible to, I guess, just inflation, like when it's at 8% or 6.2% or whatever. But that's just what I want to point out with that. I'm going to give you a big spoiler. Our revenues don't ever exceed our expenditures don't ever exceed our revenues. So we'll move over to a model here, what this is basically showing is in year 6 of the 6-year forecast, this is what our projected revenues are to be, and these are what our projected expenditures will be. So when you come down here and kind of look at the general fund as a whole, it's looking at about $63 million of revenue with $62 million of expenditures. So you can kind of see, and this table here kind of just shows what our that difference between it is. You can see it's starting out right now at about $1.6 million between, and it does start to come down a little bit because of inflation, but it comes down to about $1 million that we have each year. And this is the funds that Martha was talking about that is able to be used for other projects. Like if it's something that isn't already in the operating budget for parks, that money can then be kind of assigned to do a council goal or something like that. But you can kind of see it's coming down. I did add something just so everyone could see that the lines really don't ever meet. You can kind of see the expenditure one kind of goes up and then comes back down. That's just PERS has a 2-year rate. So it jumps up a little bit and then holds stable and then jumps up again and then kind of holds stable. But anyway, so what this does do, as you remember, is we can actually kind of adjust these different factors. So right now, it's projecting inflation over the long term to be at about 2.5%. So what I did is I went back into the federal CPI calculate things for the last 10 and 20 years and found that for the last 10 years, including the last two, the 8 and the 6.2, inflation was about 2.6% over the 10 years. Over the last 20 years, it's been 2.4%. So using 2.5 isn't that, I mean, it's kind of just splitting the difference right there. It's kind of pretty right in the middle. But what this does is it'll show you, like, if we make this from like a medium, like 1, 2 is low, 3, 4 is medium, and 5, 6 is high. So if we say, okay, lodging tax is going to be a lot higher, and we change that to 6, it'll change the graph, but you can kind of see it really didn't do a whole lot because it's not that dependent on lodging. So if you just leave it, and you can kind of do that with all of them. And it's really, when you go through the whole thing, the only one that it's dependent upon is this one right here. So if you put inflation, and I make this, and I make it just something that hasn't even happened over the last 20 years, then, you know, if it's at 4% annually, again and again and again for like 6 solid years, then you will see that the lines do cross out in like 2025. And we'll reassess and that kind of stuff. But having that happen for that many times, I mean, because it's saying it's going to be 4 and 4 and 4 and 4 and 4, not like 8 and 6 and then 1 and then -1, and like usually happens in a recession, it kind of goes actually negative. So
So I actually had a question, and Martha, if you want me to hold it for later, is more around that inflation. I absolutely get what you're saying, Sean, over the long term, but obviously we've been through a period of very high inflation with the 3% property measure cap. How are we dealing with that and salaries and retention and all the challenges that all of us are experiencing?
Well, first of all, we have a really collaborative working relationship with our labor unions, and so they've been great partners at the table of understanding that we can't just have we have to have a cap. We can't just go to CPI. And we've worked with them to find one-time ways to help them deal with inflation as opposed to ongoing increases to base salary. So first, shout out to my labor partners because they understand the financial condition of the city and they are collaborative in trying to design solutions that protect members. I think that. I think that Sean's discussion on the forecast is really the challenge, and you'll see when I write the budget message, you'll see us grappling with that because I think our conundrum is how long is it going to last? And a year ago, I probably would have told you it wasn't going to last a year. Well, it has. So I'm trying to be humble about that. What you will see us doing is no increase in headcount. Even in areas where an increase in headcount might deal with a workload problem, you'll see us saying we're just going to suck it up. You'll see some reductions in some M&S lines, but probably the biggest thing you're going to see is that Sean and I don't believe there's going to be a lot of carry forward in the upcoming biennium that would allow us to, in some past years, we've been able to set money aside for future capital or for other sort of rainy day events, and you will see that we are not going to be able to do that. So I think this budget we can balance. It's a question of if inflation continues at the current pace, we'll have to have some much more challenging conversations in the following biennium. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
I guess the other thing I could go over is the pipe and actually discuss it more, like actually what all of these things are. Kind of like,
the syringe.
just because everyone was looking at it, I just thought, oh, I'll just throw it up here just to see it. So what this is, and it's actually to the size of what the amount of the revenues are. So the wider it is, actually the more revenue there is. And so what this is basically showing is in this column right here, these are the non-specific general fund revenues. It starts out up here, and as this amount goes over to police, there's less to actually come down, and fire, there's less than that's left. So this right here is basically these two pipes minus, you know, that. And you can kind of see it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller to where, you know, every different department gets their cut. And then over here, you're seeing the revenues that the actual departments generate. And you kind of see fire actually generates more of their own revenue than police does, which makes sense because their fire contracts are about twice that of the 911 contracts. Parks from their fees from rec, planning from their planning counter, street, that's street maintenance fee, it's the state shared revenues. And then the library is the library district. So you can kind of see, and then this one, these pipes right here are the ones that actually are showing into scale what their actual budgets are to each other. And it's from, you know, the largest budget to the smallest budget, so.
What is ACC?
Adult Community Center? Yes, Mr. Dotz.
Is this a conversion of the Lazenby?
Yes.
The same thing? So this isn't what Lazenby had, this is a different, you're using the same,
Yeah.
okay, that's fine, I thought it was, but I was,
So this is, yeah, he actually built the model that I update every year
all
or
right,
two.
that's cool,
Yeah.
I just was.
Anyways, I just thought, yeah, I would, since you already saw it, I would throw it up here and actually explain a little more what each of these lines mean and to scale and stuff. But anyway, so does anyone have any questions about the forecast in general? I mean, we're kind of looking out what the 6th year, because we want to look long-term here, more strategic and not just at the 2 years. How are we looking? And it looks pretty good, but like Martha was saying, you know, there could be some challenges if inflation do go beyond 25.
So the other thing I would always say about the 6 years, it just tells you what kinds of things you need to be thinking about, because we're going to put our hands on the wheel every 2 years and budget again, right? So 2 years from now, we'll do another forecast, and hopefully the lines will continue to be, because of the decisions we make now, will better secure the financial future. So whatever this forecast shows, it will likely be better than the forecast. So the fact that Sean has given you a forecast that's already pretty good, I think means we're starting from a relative place of financial security. As long as we don't do anything crazy, like add a bunch of FTE in a high inflationary environment.
John?
So can you, there's not really any total things on here other than the net general fund balance available at the end. And that's a cumulative running number, is that correct? So
No, this is
that's
just,
what will be
this
the
is the
balance?
annual, no, this is what we annually have. This is the difference, this is,
That will be the difference?
Yeah,
So
so
you
this
don't
is-
have a cumulative number. If you don't spend any balance, we could build up funds, I guess is what I'm saying.
That's the question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the big picture, do you have a little graph that says what our projected fund balance would be? I think it's important to look at trends, and if we've spent it before, I mean, because this doesn't include any of the contingencies or
no.
or anything that we have
Correct.
balance-wise,
It doesn't. So we generally don't hold more than what the 30% requirement is. After that, council goals usually, like last time we had set $1.8 million aside for the rec center. Probably use that in this upcoming budget. So we'll usually put it in the, you know,
And some.
yeah, I know, but that's generally where we'll put it in the reserve for the other bigger capital items. So there really isn't more than I mean, we can put it in a reserve for other things, but generally we've always in the past, there's always been so many needs that it's been used for streets, it's been used for lots of parks, it's been used for,
Right. All I'm saying is that it looks like we're saving a little bit of money each year, but I think it's not giving you the credit for showing how much of a fund balance that we actually have that we can operate with. That, I mean,
Yeah.
if you look along here, it looks like, yikes, we're within $1 million
yeah.
on a
The only thing of
a
using
big budget.
the contingency up in one year, with our policies, you have to make it up the next year. So it'd be like borrowing from it, but you then have to repay it. So you don't really want to get into the contingency, and the fund balance is really, there really to make it through December when you get we collect 92% of our property taxes
At once.
the last week of November and the first week of December. We have to get there. Like Martha was saying, all the utilities, it's a monthly bill. So they every month's kind of the same, except for water. Summer's a little bit bigger, but the rest of them all kind of, it's all kind of, they don't have that big dry season before they can actually get money for things that they've been working, paying for. So like, police and fire, which we just saw is huge and, a part of our budget. We're not receiving any of those monies to pay for the first half of the year. So we always have to keep a pretty large amount there. Yeah, it is growing, and right now it's at $18 million, and I think you could just kind of grow it out. It's probably going to be 20 million or 22 million, and by the end of the biennium, and then just add a couple million every year just for inflation. So again, it's our policy minimum, so we won't really touch it. If we do put stuff aside, we'll put it in our capital reserve, which is currently pretty good, but it's gonna, I think, thinking it's gonna be used for the.
Right. No, I'm just saying that this gives you a snapshot of revenue and expenses, but I don't think it gives you the full picture.
It's a worst case
thing.
scenario. I mean, what Sean won't say is that we are fairly conservative in our assumptions to make sure that we're not giving you an overly optimistic forecast, right? We want to be thoughtful about what we're actually able to do. We don't want to be too conservative so that we don't do important work. We're not trying to pile up money, but we are also trying to be realistic about where are the financial pressures and what do we need to manage in terms of program activity, headcount, to make sure we can stay in balance.
So this is really just looking at the operations. It's not this is just ongoing revenues and ongoing expense. There's no one time in any of this.
No capital in there.
So,
Right.
and that's,
Steve has a comment.
I'm not sure. I'm maybe slow, but I lived through the early 80s, late 70s, when inflation was booking along, much above 4% for an extended period of time. I understand the math averaging backwards, but is the 2.5%, are you saying their expenses are going up to 2.5% a year, or inflation is going to be 2.5%, which wouldn't be necessarily apples and apples with expenses?
I'm really talking about inflation, but it could be it won't be all of our expenditures. Like our bargaining agreements, there's a ceiling and a floor. So if inflation's 1%, our floor is 2%. But for that give, we got, if inflation's at 6%, our ceiling's 4%. So it kind of protects us that way too, that our personnel costs don't go up as quickly. They don't follow inflation. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, why? I was, and the control of the FTEs is sort of takes the air out of the tire.
Shamil, let's go.
Thank you. I think you answered it, you both did, but I just want to clarify. So it seems like in the budget, what we're dealing with is essentially the fixed cost that we know what will happen in the next 2 years and not the one-time
You'll do both.
ticket items?
You'll do both in the budget process. So that very first meeting, we're really, on May 4th, we'll focus on the general fund. And it's a really operationally focused conversation with all y'all. There'll be some conversation about projects, but then you will get a chance to review the CIP. Because when you approve the budget, remember what you're doing is you're approving our appropriations, our maximum appropriations, and you're approving the tax rate. So you kind of have to have a handle both on our operational expenditures and our capital expenditures.
I guess a follow-up to that then, to piggyback on what Steve and Elizabeth mentioned, worst case scenario, if inflation does remain in the next 2 years, are we padding some of our reserves to prepare for that? Or
we're not going to talk to you about how we're building the budget, but I will say we are anticipating inflation continuing for some time as part of the budget process.
Yeah.
Say that again, Martha, what are you not going to do?
I'm not going to talk about specifics about how we are balancing the budget, but we know about inflation. We are going to
preparing worst case scenarios. Okay.
Yeah.
And to clarify, per rules, we can't talk about the budget at this meeting. So that's,
Sure,
that's
sure,
what's
sure.
what's going on.
No, just curious if we're considering some of those worst-case scenarios.
Thank you. Ali has a comment.
How long have you been doing the biennial budget process? How many, is that
24, 15,
years?
right, 24.
This will be our third, I guess, true biennial budget, but
Okay.
for the 4 years before that, so 2 biennium before that, we did a biennial budget, but then it got approved annually. We didn't change it. The second year, we came, we met
Okay.
we met one meeting, it got approved again, and we did that twice, so.
I'm definitely for that. What are the chances that we can look at the last 20 years budget versus actual, and we see how things have been moving forward?
For the general fund as a whole, or for every department, or?
You'd want to go look at our audits, and you could totally look at them.
No, it's not about audit, it's about the trend. So if there are concerns that whether inflation is going to be half a point this way or half a point that way, if we look at the trend, does that give us information that we shouldn't panic about this, everything is going to be okay?
So you shouldn't panic about it. Everything is going to be okay. A backward look, though, probably won't be very useful to you because there are a variety of conditions that have happened in the past that we're not currently facing. So the Great Recession, for example, COVID is, I think the problem is a backward look, I don't think is, it's not a really great handle, but except to tell you that in general, our departments come in at or below their appropriation levels. If that makes sense. And when Sean and I do our first pass, I talked to the chair and co-chair about this earlier in their process. One of the first things we do is we look at how good the crystal balls are of various departments in terms of their last biennium budget and tracking their actual expenditures to see where what they thought, what program of work they thought they were going to do and what they were actually able to get done during a biennium. And so I think we've got a pretty good handle now about what are the major cost drivers for each of the different functions. I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
It does make sense. Your indicator also shows a very good, solid program managing the money and is staying within budget. What I was wondering is, over the years, how the trend has been, and I'm assuming it's going to show all the same results, that the budget has been managed and it's not any overruns, even though we have had inflation rates going up and down, the city still kept it within budget. If it shows that, then I think a whole lot of questions and concerns that
Right.
were brought up here, it just sort of goes away.
Yeah, I think Sean said something, though, that is really important, is for our general fund departments, the vast majority of the budget is personnel. I mean, and because we have labor agreements in place, we're able generally to predict personnel costs pretty accurately. I am frustrated if a department's head is not within, between 95 and 97% on personnel costs. They do have turnover, so it's not perfect, but they can get them right. So I guess what I would say is, when you're reviewing the budget, if you focus on personnel, you'll really be 80 to 90% of the way there.
I would like to see, there's some discussion there. Would you like to make a comment?
Well, it occurred to me, listening to you, that the term PERS has not been used. And I'm wondering, how does it, is this not germane right now? How does this fit into this? I mean, the PERS has been a big bugaboo for, for a long time.
Yeah, so our PERS rate is going up for the biennium, but it's going up by less than 1 extra percentage point. So if it was at 26% on average before, it's at 27% on average now. So it's not going up at the same speed that it had been going up.
The state collared the
Well,
rates.
wait, that's the rate, not
Yeah,
the
I'm saying the
percentage
rate.
up. Right, because actually it's a difference between 20, it's going up to 29?
Yeah, so it's about 3%.
Yeah, so it's a 3%
Less than
rise.
inflation.
Which is in your
Right.
equation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, it's in there.
Well, I know, but I mean, but it fits.
Yes,
currently.
It's in your forecast,
yeah.
yes.
But the PERS number, I mean, as Steve was saying earlier, was more like, I don't know, 15 years ago, it was more like at 11%, right? 12%. And now it's at 29 of your total payroll. Is that correct?
I think it's been a lot higher than 12. Yeah, we weren't like the schools, we didn't buy down the rates or anything, so.
Well, it was,
we didn't have to loan
okay,
to pay,
even if
but
it was 15 or 18, it's gone up.
it's probably gone up 7 or 8 percentage, not percent, but percentage points on the rate since.
Right.
In the last, it's probably 12, 13 years I've been here. But
Which is
we-
a big chunk.
yeah.
I mean, that's 7% of your total payroll
It
dollars
is,
that
but
you
what we
spend.
have done at the same time is we've been able to renegotiate some of our healthcare, and it's offsetting it on the other way. So, so that's actually been pretty big for us. And the other thing that's kind of helped over time is with inflation being around 2% and our revenues coming in at 3.5% higher, we've actually been doing a lot better that way too. It's just this biennium we're in now, and the next biennium will be a little trickier, but.
Sean, Al has a comment?
Thank you, Chair Carson. Just so I understand, did I understand you to say, Director Cross, that we're going to go from a rate of 26 to a rate of 29? That is a 3 percentage point increase?
No, the rate's going up by less than 1%.
Less than 1%? Okay.
I mean, as a percent, like a rate of less than 1%, but it's of the overall, if you take 1% and divide it by 27, it's roughly 3%.
Yeah, okay. So
Yeah.
it's going from something like
Yeah.
26 to something like 27?
Yeah.
I see, okay.
Well, I mean, we have 4 different rates, and when you blend it and by the different,
You know, going back to some conversations we had like 4 years ago, one of the most, I thought, instructive things that you showed me was actually the rate construction table. And it might get too far into the weeds, perhaps, I don't know, but for me personally, it was extremely helpful to see how those rates are constructed and how they change from year to year. So I guess I can make a request that we do that. Is that something you can accommodate for us?
go over how PERS is, how the rates have changed over time?
I can send you, there was
Okay.
a schedule that you showed me, and I think that, if I remember correctly, most of those rates were mandated. I mean, there wasn't, you don't really have a choice. You have to pretty much do what the state
Yes.
advises you
You
to do.
don't, they're not negotiated.
They're not suggestions.
No. And you can kind of see it here, because it's taking our actual payroll and dividing it by what we actually paid in PERS. So our blended rate was right now is 27% for last fiscal year. And you can kind of see that we built it to be pretty conservative. I mean, we built it up to be 34%, which it's most likely not going to do.
be.
But I'm just saying it's pretty conservative in what it's doing, so.
Yeah, and that's similar to the information I was referring to, that,
Yeah.
but you also showed me I think you said there were 4 rates, right? So-
Yes, there's
and
one,
this is
yeah.
we're seeing an average of them. We're blending.
Exactly, and what's we're seeing now from probably when we started, I don't know, when I started here 12, 13 years ago, there's more of the OPSRP, and it's a much lower rate. And so when you blend it together, it's actually bringing that rate down. Any other questions?
Yep.
On the agenda.
Nope, okay.
Any more questions or comments? Good, thank you, Sean.
Mhm.
Let's go to the next agenda item, which is the selection of the Municipal Grants Review Subcommittee. Anthony, do you want to take the lead?
Yeah, so we have about $80,000 available for us to distribute. Well, can I say that?
Well, yes, you can say that.
Okay.
did.
I just realized, if Russell talks specifics, I just talked specifics, so.
It's fine, it's fine.
Anyways, we have money available to give for the missile grants, and so we're looking for a committee that's willing to serve on it, and anybody that's served on the past, do you kind of want to talk about your experience on it, and then hopefully we can select a group to be able to do that, but we're hoping to be able to go through a process. I don't know if Lynn, if you want to talk about maybe how much of a commitment it is for people, so they know.
Yeah, I think it was a rewarding experience for me where I realized how many organizations there are here in town. If you want to know more and you want to help distribute the money, I think this is a good committee to be on. How many committee members do you need?
Yes, so I mean, ideally, it would be great to have a mix of counselors and budget committee members. So I think, in the past, having something around no more than maybe 6, but I think that's kind of what we're hoping for, so. Yep.
Right, so do we ask anyone to volunteer at this time?
Please.
Yeah, go ahead. All right, we have Vice Chair Elizabeth.
Okay, cool.
Shaima, Gary,
And we could have 4. 4 is okay.
John.
That's 4, yeah.
Did I see
Which one of you,
somewhere?
which one of you is he pointing at?
I think I'm in the hot
Trudy.
seat.
Okay, so Trudy.
Councilor
That's
Trudy?
great.
Great.
Yeah, too.
And I have 5, is that correct?
That's great.
Great, thank you. Let's go on to the next step in terms of future meeting topics.
Next time we see you, we'll present the budget message.
How to distribute money.
Do we have like a ceremony or something that we could do?
Yeah, that would be a song. Actually, Sean's gonna write a haiku.
And he's going to read it out loud to us, right?
There we go.
And spoiler alert, it's all no's, just so you know.
Right, do we have any other comments? Or do we go for adjournment?
Move we adjourn.
Right? Do I have to make a motion? Okay, we're adjourned.
Adjourn?
All right, thank you.
Good job, well done.
No, we're not.
Everyone.
I'm